Welcome, everyone, to our fourth episode of Just Two Assholes Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Matt Bowen.
And I'm Daniel Powell.
And let's get started. So first, we're going to go around the league. So the Steelers came out and said that they are taking offers for Le'Veon Bell. So we're going to take a guess on who we think he's going to go to. So they're already talking about the Jets, so we're not going to mention that team because that report's already out. I'm going to start out with my first one. I'm going to say the Bucs. They're really lacking in the running back position. I mean, they're going to Jacquizz Rodgers just because he's a better pass blocker and he's a better catcher out of the backfield than Peyton Barber is. So I think he'd be a really, really good piece. They already got a strong O-line. They got a lot of offensive weapons, and it would help Fitzpatrick out as well. Who do you got for your first team?
Yeah, I think the Jets are the most likely just because the report has already come out that they have already spoken to the Steelers about a possible trade, and he really would fit perfect on that Jets offense as well. I mean, he fits perfect in nearly any offense. It's just how good of a player Le'Veon Bell is. So the Jets make sense. The first team on my list is also the Buccaneers, and for all the same reasons you said. They're rolling right now, and the only thing missing from that offense would be a starter quality running back, and Le'Veon Bell is way more than a starting quality running back. Peyton Barber got the starting gig, really hasn't done a whole lot, is averaging something like 3 yards a carry or something like that. Jacquizz Rodgers, like you said, is a good pass blocker, so he gets to play a lot of downs. He's a decent pass catcher, so that works for them, but Le'Veon Bell is the whole package. He's a better pass catcher than Jacquizz Rodgers. He's a better pass blocker than Jacquizz Rodgers. He's a better running back than anyone that they have on their team. And Ronald Jones has been a healthy scratch every single game this year. That's their second-round draft pick at running back who's been healthy and inactive every single game. That is shocking and a really, really big indictment on his skill set. Since we have the same team, I'll roll into my second team. My second choice is the Colts. They have all the cap space in the world right now, so they could not only pay Lev Bell this year, but they could sign him to a long-term contract for the money that he wants. And just like the Bucs, I think that the Colts offense is pretty good, and the only thing they're really missing is a good running back. They're starting Jordan Wilkins and Marlon Mack right now at running back, and those are two names that just do not inspire confidence whatsoever.
Yeah, and I mean, the Colts definitely have the cap space, so we didn't talk about it with the Jets. The Jets have $17.1 million in cap space. The Buccaneers, they only have 8.4, which Bell with his franchise tag is $14.5 million this year if he signs it with a different team or if he signs anywhere. So, but I'm pretty sure if the Bucs wanted him, they could move some, maybe turn some guaranteed money into some signing bonuses. They can make some room for him cap money wise. But yeah, the Colts, they have $51 million in cap space so they definitely can't afford him. Yeah, I think Le'Veon Bell would work for the Colts. Like you said, they really don't have anyone in the backfield, and having a solid running back would actually take more pressure off Andrew Luck, help him ease in back into playing really. Because you saw at the end of the Colts game, they didn't really trust his arm to make that 60-plus yard run or throw at the end of the game, that Hail Mary, when they put Jacoby Brissett in the game.
Yeah, that was kind of nuts to see, actually. Like, everyone knew that the deep ball was coming because that's what they had to do, but them taking Andrew Luck out of the game and replacing him with Brissett is... it really, really confirms what a lot of fears were, that Andrew Luck's arm is not 100% like they said it was in the offseason. He's really not all the way back yet.
Yeah, It just points out that instead of having Andrew Luck, who's played all game, he's got a warm arm, he's warmed up, to take a cold quarterback off the sideline, and he actually overthrew the ball.
Yeah.
It went through the back of the end zone. So they got to figure something out and get him healthy, and Le'Veon Bell definitely could help them. My next pick is actually Green Bay. They really haven't had anything solid in Green Bay for the running back since Eddie Lacy's first couple of years. Even the last couple of years he was with Green Bay, he was dealing with injury concerns and all that. As far as cap space, they have 7.9, so right below the Buccaneers. But like anything, they could move some money around and really get Le'Veon if they wanted to. One thing to point out, too, is the Steelers. They only have $7.5 million of cap space. So even if Bell wanted to sign with them, if they just shook hands and just said, okay, I'm going to play, they would have to move money around too. So it is possible. But yeah, I'll talk a little bit more about Green Bay. I mean, you get Aaron Rodgers. he's never really had a solid running back with him. And they have some pass catchers. Geronimo Allison is actually coming up pretty nice. He might be taking the spot over for Randall Cobb for the wide receiver 2, at least the last 2 weeks. First week it was Randall Cobb, but the last 2 weeks he's really made some big plays. So I think he could be a really big help in that offense.
Yeah, and Green Bay, as far as dark horse candidates go, is pretty high on my list. I think it just makes perfect sense. Like, their defense is pretty good, but their offense with Lev Bell would be... They already have one of the best offenses in the NFL, but with Le'Veon Bell, it would just put them on another planet as far as offenses go. They'd be competing with the Steelers for, best offense in the league right now. And Aaron Rodgers, just having that dump-off ability to Le'Veon Bell instead of a Jamal Williams or an Aaron Jones would be huge, and it would essentially, I think, lock up that division for them. I know the Vikings look really strong. They're really, really good on defense, but Le'Veon Bell is just a whole another monster that they would have to deal with. My dark horse candidate is actually the Oakland Raiders. I know it's a very, very big long shot for this to happen, but after trading away Khalil Mack and the fan base being so upset about that, it's something I could sort of see John Gruden doing, being like, all right, look, I know I traded away Mack and you guys hate me right now, so I'm going to trade for Le'Veon Bell with some of those picks that we got from the Bears and kind of try and make you all happy because everyone likes offense more than defense anyway, especially John Gruden.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what their cap space is right now as far as that goes, but yeah, that's my dark horse, the Raiders.
Yeah, so they have $7 million, but I mean, just like the Bucks and the Packs, and even the Steelers, like they can move money around and make space for them if they really wanted them. That'd be a hell of a 1-2 punch with Marshawn Lynch and Le'Veon Bell in that backfield. That would be pretty insane.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. A Raiders fan told me today that Marshawn Lynch has said that he will not be making the move to Las Vegas. Like, he is Oakland born and raised, and that's where he wants to play football. So he'd essentially be retiring at the end of the year. So if they could trade for Le'Veon Bell and then sign him long term, they don't have to worry about their running back position when they get to Vegas.
Yeah, with him going off the books too at the end of the year, they would have more money to spend on Bell too for a long-term contract. I'll go for my last team. I know this would never happen because it's in the division, but just think of the Ravens with Le'Veon Bell. They haven't had anyone since Ray Rice. And that's been, 6 years ago? Le'Veon Bell, with the way Joe Flacco's playing this year, and they got John Brown, Crabtree, that would be crazy. They're already a pretty strong team, I would think. They're right behind the Steelers, but they're just such a physical team, and putting Le'Veon Bell, which is another physical runner, in that backfield, I would think that would be a great landing spot. But like I said, it would never happen because it's trading within the division. They play the Steelers twice a year, so it wouldn't happen. But that would just be kind of crazy for him to go there. They have $6.4 million of cap space, but they could make it happen if they wanted to. If the Steelers lost their mind and decided to trade him to the Ravens.
Yeah, could you only imagine Ozzie Newsome calling the Steelers and asking about that? Do you imagine what the asking price would be? The Steelers would want 3 first-round picks from the Ravens in order to make that deal happen. It would have to be one of the most lopsided trades in the history of the NFL. That would be absolutely nuts. But yeah, you're right. There's no way it happens. Moving on from Le'Veon Bell, Jimmy Garoppolo tore his ACL. It sucks for me being a Niners fan, but this being a fantasy football podcast, there's not too much to talk about fantasy-wise about it, honestly. It sort of hurts Marquise Goodwin's stock, but he wasn't having all that great of a year up till now anyway. But what this might actually do, this might help George Kittle's stock. Yes. Kittle's already been a solid tight end this year. He's been a must-start every single week. And C.J. Beathard, who's going to be taking over for Jimmy Garoppolo, was college roommates and played on the same college team as George Kittle. So they are very, very good friends. They already have a connection. Kittle wasn't his favorite target while he was at Iowa, but that's because Kittle wasn't used as a pass-catching back because none of the tight ends in that Nebraska, Iowa, Illinois, that college area, none of those tight ends are used as receiving threats. But in Kyle Shanahan's offense, he most definitely is. I think he's had the most targets and receptions in that Niners offense. So Beathard having sort of a rapport with him already could help his stock a lot.
Yeah, you got to feel bad for the Niners and Kyle Shanahan. They lost their running back, and now their quarterback. I mean, big 2 signings. I mean, I knew Garoppolo was still there, but they still signed him to a great big deal. And same thing, what's the running back's name? Come on.
Breida or McKinnon?
No, McKinnon. So 2 big signings on the offseason, and both of them are out before the end of week 3. I mean, that's just got to kill. So, I mean, they can. It's good that CJ Beathard has been in that offense too. He knows it more than any other quarterback out there, really, for free agency that they're bringing in. So he's looking to be the starter, and they're looking for a backup for him. So we'll see. I mean, Kyle Shanahan drafted him, so he obviously liked the guy in the draft coming out of college. So we'll see what magic he can pull off. But yeah, I mean, they already had a tough road being in that division with the Rams, and now it's just getting even harder.
Yeah, luckily the Seahawks look like they may not be that good this year, so at least we have that going for us, which is nice. After that, Everson Griffin has now been told that he is not allowed to come back to the Vikings after his little ordeal. So apparently Everson Griffin has been having some mental health issues for the past couple weeks. And this weekend, after their loss in the team hotel, it all sort of boiled over for him. No one knows exactly what happened right now. There's some police reports out there, but basically Everson Griffin was threatening someone or a group of people that he might shoot somebody or something like that. No gun was found or anything like that, but this is a pretty huge blow to the Vikings defense. I don't think it kills them or anything because they have so many other players on that defense, but it's really just kind of a crazy story.
Yeah, I mean, it's just insane. Like you said, we don't have all the details, but especially mental health stuff, it sucks that it came for him allegedly threatening to shoot someone for him to pretty much get help. But yeah, he didn't travel with the team today since they play on Thursday. So, I mean, hopefully he gets help, and who knows, he might never play in the league again. I mean, that's going to hurt their D-line. I mean, he was a big part of that last year, and he was playing pretty good this year. He was a little banged up, and they actually sat him out on Thursday. Same thing with Dalvin Cook, which some people were saying that they overlooked the Bills, which obviously the way the game turned out, that happened, but they were overlooking the Bills and they knew that Griffin and Cook weren't 100%, so they were trying to hold them out of the game to save them for the Rams on Thursday. But, I mean, they definitely could have needed them out there this last week.
Yeah, that was crazy to see. I remember seeing that the Bills were up. It was like 14-0 at one point, and I was like, well, that's kind of weird. And then you look back, it was like 30 minutes later, and now it's like 20-0. And it's like, okay, wait a minute, like, what is going on? Like, how is this even possible? We were on Sunday watching Red Zone, and the game was almost never brought up on Red Zone just because there was only one team scoring. And that Josh Allen hurdle over Anthony Barr, was it? Yeah, over Anthony Barr. That's got to have Buffalo fans jumping through tables, man. That was awesome.
Yeah, I mean, that was crazy. They were 17.5-point underdogs, and they won by 21 points. I mean, for the Vikings, it's hard when you really have no running game in there because Latavius Murray really didn't do anything. And Kirk Cousins had 3 fumbles and I think 2 picks. You need better from Kirk Cousins when you give him a 3-year, $90 million fully guaranteed deal. So let's see if he can bring it back against the Rams. It's going to be tough. But one thing I was reading about today was that Tre'Davious White, is that who it was? Tre'Davious White out of LSU. Because Stephon Diggs really didn't do anything in that game. He was targeted 10 times, but only had 4 catches for 17 yards. And he's the reason why. He was shadowing the entire game, and that's why Adam Thielen, I think he had 13 or 14 catches, but he was targeted 17 or 18 times. So we'll have to see if Diggs can pick it up against the Ram and their strong defense.
Yeah, because Diggs is he's supposedly one of the best route runners in the NFL. So you'd think, like, outside of the top tier of cornerbacks, which I didn't think Tre'Davious White was before this game, but he could be making that sort of name for himself this year. But going up against the Rams, so it looks like Aqib Talib had ankle surgery and is going to be out for about 4 weeks. So that could help Diggs a lot. And then Marcus Peters is also banged up. So that combination of Diggs and Thielen could actually be pretty huge if Kirk Cousins cannot fumble the ball 3 times.
Yeah, and if they actually get Dalvin Cook running, it's going to be hard going against Aaron Donald and Sue. They're going to need Cousins to step it up. But yeah, Talib, so I was reading reports today that they don't actually know how bad it is until they actually get in there. They don't know if there's ligament damage. They couldn't tell on the MRI. So He had a high ankle sprain, but they opted for surgery. And at the best, he could be out for 4 weeks, but it could be longer than that if they actually find some real damage in there. And then, for Peters, he's just day-to-day with a calf strain. So he should be back. He might not be 100%, but he'll at least be back for this next game. So to move on, so Josh Rosen actually played, and more than just the fourth quarter. So Sam Bradford just played horrible in that game. So they had to go with the rookie. They really did. So he's actually been named the starter, at least for this week, and as long as he doesn't play as bad as Bradford does. I mean, even if he does, what's the point now? I mean, they're not going to the Super Bowl. They're not going to the playoffs. Why not get this guy experience like Josh Allen's getting in Buffalo?
Yeah, and there's no way I think they will go back. You can't go back on something like that. And everyone sort of knew that Bradford was going to lose that starting job. I don't think anyone knew it would happen like this, though. When they signed Bradford, I knew their O-line was not great, but I thought Sam Bradford would play decent for them, and like everyone else, I thought he'd be injured by week 4 or 5, and Rosen would come in and then probably finish out the season just because Sam Bradford has never been able to stay healthy. In the past couple of years, he's looked like a pretty decent quarterback. I think he holds the record for the highest completion percentage in an entire season at like 71% or something like that one year. So Sam Bradford, the skill set was there. It's just he just completely flubbed it this season, and now Rosen is the starter. And I think this. Sorry, that's my dog. We'll edit this part out. So Josh Rosen, I think, might help the stock of David Johnson a little bit. They haven't been using David Johnson all that well. I think he's only got 44 touches on the year so far. I think that coaching staff might just not know how to use David Johnson all that well. You just need to force feed him the ball in the passing game and the run game. Josh Rosen, I think, helps the most Christian Kirk, who in the preseason looked like they had a pretty good rapport together, and they're two young guys who are going to be the building blocks for this team for the next couple of years.
Yeah, so David Johnson, 34 attempts. That's all. Just 34 within 3 games. That's insane.
That's nuts.
That is crazy. Before he had his wrist injury last year, he was going number 1, number 2 in most fantasy leagues. He was looked at one of the top 3 running backs in the league. You got to use him. I know they got a new coach in there, and I mean, he's only got 10 receptions too. So he's a great pass catcher out of the backfield. But yeah, I agree with you, Christian Kirk. That's going to be a good improvement for him. And another guy, so Arceus Jones, so their tight end, that could help as well because he's been doing all right so far this year. Jermaine Gresham really has been used for tight end, so that should help Seals Jones. But yeah, so what happened with Bradford in that game is he had 4 turnovers in the first half. They were already on their road to 0-3. I mean, I'm glad that the Cardinals did this. It really gives Rosen more experience throughout the year, and it only helps him, really. I mean, Bradford is not someone that you want to sit behind him and learn his bad habits, unlike how Mahomes did with Alex Smith, where Alex Smith actually helped him. He's an accurate quarterback. He taught him how to study. I could see Bradford really fearing his job and not helping Rosen too much this year. So I think it was a good call by the Cardinals.
Yeah, and Rosen, I completely lost my train of thought there. We're just going to move on, I think. So also rookie starting this week is Baker Mayfield. Baker, touchdown maker, finally gets the start. Tyrod Taylor has looked horrible all year. He looked horrible in the preseason. I am shocked that Baker Mayfield did not start week 1. And he came in and he brought the Browns back last week and they won that football game. And he looked absolutely fucking incredible doing it. I wasn't a big fan of Baker coming out of the draft. I thought he had some mechanical issues. And while his accuracy at Oklahoma was good, I thought it was more of a product of the offense. I thought his ball placement wasn't that great. But it looked like I was completely wrong in that last game. He looked like a true NFL quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, well, to talk about Oklahoma, and it might be a system thing. I mean, you see what Kyle Murray's doing in Oklahoma right now.
Yeah.
He's lighting it up. So, but yeah, there's a difference between Tyrod Taylor playing not to lose his job and Baker Mayfield just going out there playing to win. That's completely different mindsets. But yeah, the Browns won. That is just insane to say. It's been 2 years. I mean, everyone in Cleveland was happy when they unlocked those Bud Light lockers, those coolers. But yeah, Mayfield, for what he did, he had a pretty good game. No touchdowns, but let's see what he got sacked a couple times. He didn't really do anything on his legs, but he ended up for 17 of 23 for 200 yards, 1 sack for -8 yards, but no touchdowns, no interceptions. And it was just a tough game for the Browns. Their defense really stepped up against the Jets. Had Sam Darnold throw 2 interceptions, but yeah, I'm excited. I mean, Baker Mayfield he really has that swagger. Just brings extra energy to the team. I know Tyrod Taylor. I mean, he took the Bills to the playoffs last year, and look at the Bills now without him. But Baker Mayfield is definitely an improvement, and he helps Carlos Hyde. He really does, because with he takes chances. Where Tyrod Taylor, more of him, he's more of a dink-dunk guy. He would rather take the guaranteed pass for 6 yards than go for the home run 40-yard touchdown pass. So that is going to keep the corners and the safeties and even the coverage linebackers a little bit more honest, because they really don't know what Mayfield's going to do out there. He's only had, I think, 3 quarters of tape now in the regular season, so that's going to open up the gaps for Carlos Hyde, and their offensive line has looked pretty decent this year.
Yeah, and so as soon as Baker came into that game, the entire Browns offense just opened up. There were suddenly much more 15 to 20-yard passes over the middle and towards the sideline, so more than Carlos Hyde, this helps Jarvis Landry.
Yep.
It helps Antonio Callaway. It helps David Njoku. That ball is going to get moved around a lot more efficiently on offense now. There's going to be more holes for Carlos Hyde to run through, and there's going to be more passes that are catchable for Antonio Callaway, David Njoku, and Jarvis Landry. So a lot of the Browns' offense is looking like a decent fantasy play right now, in my opinion.
Yeah, it really is. So I'm excited to see what they have these next couple of weeks with Mayfield. Let's see what he can turn into. Hopefully get Jarvis Landry into the end zone. He still hasn't scored this year, but he had 100 yards last week, so that's pretty good for him. So that's pretty much it around the league. I don't think we forgot anything, but make sure to let us know. Leave us some comments when we actually post in the league that we posted this podcast if we missed anything. Let's move to free agents as far as in our league. So let's start with quarterbacks. So you got some top ones out there. You got Andy Dalton, Ryan Tannehill, Joe Flacco. That's pretty much it, really. I mean, the next couple ones are Josh Allen, which you really can't rely on. Eli Manning, which has been up and down this season, and really just anytime he gets any pressure around him, he just falls. He doesn't wait to get hit. He just falls. You got Derek Carr in there, which that offense really hasn't done anything this year. They've had some big plays and been hurt by penalties, but he's not very consistent. But so Andy Dalton, he's been a surprise. He's number 12 ranked for points in our league as far as quarterbacks go. He's had 55 points, averaging 18 points a game, and he's playing Atlanta, which Atlanta just lost their other starting safety for the year. So they're down Keanu Neal, the starting safety that just got hurt, and then Deion Jones, their linebacker.
Yep.
So that's 3 starters that they're already done by week 3. So he could have a really good matchup with him. And that offense really has been pretty damn good. Tyler Boyd lit it up this past game.
Yeah, that Bengals offense has been surprisingly good. And if we've learned anything from the season so far, it's that games against Atlanta are more than likely going to be shootouts. They're going to be high-powered, both teams having really good offensive showings. So Andy Dalton seems like a great streaming option this week as far as quarterbacks go, if your quarterback's going up against a good defense or something like that. Ryan Tannehill also looks like a pretty decent pickup. He had 25 points against the New England Patriots, who just do not look like themselves this year. But Tannehill's had a pretty decent season altogether so far. Let's see. Week 1, he only had 13 points against Tennessee, but Tennessee's defense has been surprisingly stingy against most offenses. No one's really put up a really good game against them so far. He had 16 against the Jets, which if you get 16 out of your starting quarterback in fantasy, you're not crazy happy about it, but you're not mad either. And then 25 points. Oh, sorry, that was against Oakland last week. He put up 25 fantasy points. He's against New England this week, who hasn't looked like himself, but the game is in Foxborough, so it could be slightly a gamble. The other free agent quarterback to kind of talk about is who we just spoke about, Baker Mayfield. I expect someone to pick up Baker Mayfield. I think it will happen just so they can stash him. We do run a 5-man bench, so that makes that a little bit tougher to do. But if you pick him up this week and put him on your bench and he balls out, he's someone that you could look at starting the week after that.
And, I mean, they're playing Oakland, too. So Oakland's defense really hasn't been anything. I mean, I keep hearing that they need pass rushers. I know there was this guy on their team earlier this offseason that they had. He was really good. But, I mean, he's not there anymore, so they need to find some pass rush. So Baker Mayfield should have some time behind that line. Back to Tannehill. So it's a good matchup. He's not a super great quarterback, but he is a reliable streamer, like you said. And New England, they let a 100-yard rusher from Detroit actually show up again, Kerryon Johnson. That was the first time, I think, in 4 or 5 years since Reggie Bush did that.
Yeah, something like
that.
So
the running game for Miami is going to get rolling, so that should help the passing lanes open up for Tannehill. So I'm expecting to have a big game. But, yeah, to go back to Baker Mayfield, there's just the possibilities are endless with him. You really don't know what's going to happen. He could be middle of the pack. He could be top 12. He really could. So he's definitely someone to watch out for. But, yeah, definitely someone pick him up. I know a couple of people already put some waiver claims in for him. I'm one of them. So let's see if I get him.
And then looking at running backs, there's not a lot or anything to talk about as far as free agent running backs go. Here you've got Buck Allen from the Ravens, who has just proven to be a giant vulture this year. He's put up good fantasy points every week while really not getting a lot of touches because he's put up a touchdown every single week. I don't think you can rely on that to continue. Against Pittsburgh, it's not a bad way to go because Pittsburgh's defense is not all that good, especially against pass-catching running backs. So Buck Allen could be in for a big week again. I just think you're kind of chasing points with him.
Yeah, I mean, for him, so last week, so week 2, he had 6 rushes for 8 yards and a touchdown. Last week, 6 rushes for 7 yards and a touchdown. He's their goal line guy. So he is flex at best because he is so touchdown dependent. If he didn't get a touchdown, he would have had 0.8 points, which we don't even do decimals, so he would have had 0 points.
Yeah.
He would have had 0 points the last 2 weeks, so yeah. But what sucks is that's really the best out there. I mean, Chris Ivory's out there, so depending on LaShawn McCoy's health, maybe. He had 13.5 points this last game, so we'll see. With Josh Allen rolling, the running game should get a little bit better in Buffalo, but I really don't see anyone else for free agency for running backs out there.
Yeah, and Chris Ivory, so if it comes out that LaShawn McCoy isn't going to play, then I think you can sign Chris Ivory and start him in your flex and feel pretty happy about it because you've got a starting NFL running back in your flex at that point. Yeah. He is Chris Ivory, so he could put up a dud, but at the very least, you're starting a guy on your fantasy team who is starting for an NFL team, and most of the time, that's good enough.
Yeah, I think you could get him without wasting a waiver too. So let's probably wait till Wednesday or Thursday, or even Saturday, to see if LaShawn McCoy's even playing. Let's move to wide receivers. So we actually have something to talk about here. So we got Calvin Ridley, Tyler Boyd, Mike Williams, Geronimo Allison, Albert Wilson. And it just keeps going on. There's a lot of good wide receivers out there, which they haven't been super good this season. But, I mean, Calvin Ridley, he exploded last week with 3 touchdowns. It put him in number 8 for points overall for wide receivers this season. He had 35.5 points last week. It seems like he has really overstepped Sanu for that wide receiver too. So whenever Julio Jones is matched up with a really good cornerback on the other side, look for them to go to Ridley. And I mean, it proved it last week.
Yeah, and the other big one right under him is Tyler Boyd, who has exploded in that Bengals offense so far and has taken control of that number 2 spot. A lot of people thought that might go to John Ross, but Tyler Boyd, a lot of people forget, coming out of college, was talked about as a really, really good route runner who was going to be a solid possession receiver and could get you a lot of first downs and really just catch a lot of passes. And that's what he's done so far. So 3 receptions in week 1, he didn't really find his footing. And then 6 in week 2 and week 3 for 18 and 22 points. If that Bengals offense stays as high-powered as it has been, and against Atlanta this week, it definitely should, and yes, AJ Green keeps getting double-teamed, Tyler Boyd is going to continue to have big, big games, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we talked a little bit about this on our last podcast since they played on Thursday. We were able to go throughout the game. John Ross really hasn't started anything. They really haven't been able to connect with him. His chemistry with Andy Dalton is just off. So Tyler Boyd definitely looks like their number 2. Another guy that we talked about a little earlier before the podcast was Geronimo Allison. So he's kind of stepped in for the wide receiver 2 in Green Bay. It looks like him and at least he's 2A and 2B. with Randall Cobb. You can put him either 2A, 2B. He has 37.5 points. He's averaging 12.5. Last week he had 14 points. He's top 30 so far in scoring for wide receivers. And with Green Bay's offense, they are playing Buffalo. So who knows? We might see White shadowing or at least giving a lot of attention to Devontae Adams. So we could see him blowing up just the way Adam Thielen did last week.
Yeah, and it really looks like he has taken over that Randall Cobb spot. Cobb hasn't done much of anything the past 2 weeks, and Geronimo Allison just keeps catching balls and making plays. Someone I actually like a little bit more than Geronimo Allison this week, maybe not for the rest of the season, but this week especially, is Mike Williams. Yep. So the Chargers are playing the Niners, and it's going to be in San Diego, so it's going to be a home game.
LA.
And, yeah, so maybe not a home game, but it's going to be in the Chargers' home stadium at least.
Yeah.
Mike Williams has stepped up, and Keenan Allen hasn't done a whole lot this year, and Mike Williams has, and that's kind of what they drafted him for, honestly. I think they might be trying to move on from Keenan Allen at some point, and it looks like Mike Williams might be the guy that they try and force feed the ball to a lot, and so far it's worked out. He had 10.5 points in week 1, 9 in week 2, and then 22 points last week with 2 touchdowns. So he's definitely been a red zone target and a red zone threat, and the Niners secondary, outside of Richard Sherman, who will probably see a lot of Keenan Allen, is not that good. Richard Sherman might be out this week, so if he's out, both are very, very startable. But Mike Williams will most likely face off against Jimmy Ward, who is a liability in coverage, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, he's really overstepped Kelvin Benjamin for that wide receiver 2 in that offense. He really has. The preseason, he looked excellent with Phillip Rivers. He's looking like you were saying, that at least in the red zone, they're going more to Mike Williams than they are Keenan Allen. So that's really good offense, too. It's explosive. They got a great running game. Their offensive line is pretty solid. They have a pretty consistent quarterback with Phillip Rivers. So, yeah, another explosive offense. So he's a good pickup. Someone I want to talk about, just because I'm a Miami fan, Albert Wilson. Okay, so last week he threw a touchdown, and he caught a pass for a 74-yard touchdown. Okay, so he's not going to throw a 52-yard touchdown every week. It's not going to happen. But they use him all over the place. That catch that he had, air quotes, he was reversing across the field, and Tannehill threw it up in front of him, and Albert Wilson ran in front of Tannehill and grabbed it out of it. It probably should have been a sweep, but technically, since he tossed it up in the air instead of over to him backwards, it was a throw, air quotes. So he is super explosive in that offense. It's a good matchup. New England really doesn't have 2 good linebackers there. So he could have another big week. I mean, he had 20 points, which was more than half of his fantasy points so far this year. But he might be someone that you want to stash on your bench later throughout the season. Use him.
Yeah, and you'd like to see him start to get a higher percentage of the target share.
Yeah.
So he only had 3 receptions in week 1, 3 in week 2, and 2 last week. But he's done a lot with those receptions. And those are the guys you kind of want to stash on your bench because they could see a higher percentage of the target share in following weeks after that. I don't think Kenny Stills' numbers, as far as targets go, will drop off too terribly much. But outside of Kenny Stills, someone on that offense has to start getting the ball more often. And Albert Wilson could definitely be that guy.
Yeah, they definitely love speed on that team, so he's a great guy for their offense. Do you want to talk about any other wide receivers?
I think that's all I had for wide receiver. Maybe Antonio Callaway because Baker Mayfield is playing, so he's always a deep threat. I don't know if I'd start him this week, but if you wanted to stash him on your bench just to kind of see what happens, a lot like Albert Wilson, I don't think that's a horrible play.
Yeah, I agree with that one. Yeah, but they definitely connected in the preseason, so we'll see what he can do when Baker Mayfield actually gets rolling. So to move on to tight ends, there's not too many to talk about. You got Jesse James in there. He only had half a point, though. It seemed like they really went to McDonald last week. They didn't throw to their tight ends a lot. McDonald had most of his points on a 75-yard touchdown run or catch. So, and he's right there on number 2, which he had 19 points last week. Someone that is a pretty consistent target is Atlanta's tight end Austin Hooper. So he only had 5 points last week, so he's not going to blow anyone away. But when when Matt Ryan needs help, he throws it to him over the middle. His receptions are kind of low. 3 in the first week, 5 in the second week, and 3 in last week. But I don't know. I just have a good feeling about Austin Hooper. If Julio Jones gets locked up some more, and I know Calvin Ridley's getting a lot of the targets, but I feel like Austin Hooper could probably get 5 to 6 catches a game, maybe get 50 yards. So, like I said, he's not going to blow anyone away, but he might be a good weekly substitution if you're starting tight ends on a bye.
Yeah, Hooper was a great fantasy option last year. He had a bit higher percent of the target share last year. It hasn't been the case this year, but we could definitely see that come back. Calvin Ridley exploding this week makes me worry a little bit because I think Calvin Ridley could be that guy over the middle that they rely on a bit more than Hooper. But Hooper is definitely someone that if you started him this week, I wouldn't tell you it's a bad idea. The only other guy on here I really wanted to talk about was David Njoku, just because Baker Mayfield is starting. I think his target share could go up a bit. In the preseason, Baker Mayfield really liked throwing it to David Njoku, so that's one that I would also look at.
One guy I want to talk about just real quick. So last year when Carson Wentz was actually playing, he liked his 2 tight ends. He liked Zach Ertz, and he liked Trey Burton. Trey Burton left, and they drafted Dallas Goedert. Okay, so the first 2 weeks, he didn't really do anything. But last week with Carson Wentz in there, he had 16.5 points. Carson Wentz likes to use 2 tight ends. So in the first week, he only had 1 reception for 4 yards. Nothing. In week 2, he didn't get anything. 0 points, no receptions, no yards, no touchdowns, 0 points. Last week, when Carson Wentz came back, he had 7 receptions for 73 yards and 1 touchdown for 16.5 fantasy points. Carson Wentz likes his 2 tight ends, so he's someone to watch. You might not want to pick him up this week, or maybe not use a waiver for him like the other 2 guys we talked about. It's a good guy you can stash, but down the road later in the season, he could be a really good, hot item like Trey Burton was last year in that offense.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point and someone that people should definitely be looking at now that Carson Wentz is back. That's a good call. Let's move on to defenses. If you're going to be streaming defenses this week, it's not looking all that great for you, honestly. Let's see what we got here. I'm not seeing any defense that I'm crazy about. The Packers defense against Buffalo. So Buffalo had a big week last week, but I still think they're one of the worst teams in the NFL. And I think that you can start any starting defense against them and feel pretty comfortable about that still. And then the Seahawks against Arizona. It's at Arizona, so you're not going to have the 12 making a bunch of noise and kind of throwing off Josh Rosen. And the Seahawks defense is not nearly what it used to be, but it's still... Arizona is a bad team with a not great offense, and it's a rookie quarterback in his first official start. So that's a defense that you can probably target and be pretty happy with starting.
Yeah, I agree with you with the Seahawks. That's really the only one I see out there. And you made all the great points. Yeah, with a rookie quarterback, you don't know what's going to happen. You could shake him up, throw some extra blitzes in there, something that he really hasn't gotten used to seeing because he hasn't started yet. So this will be his first start. And they did have 18.5 points with some pretty good turnovers. Earl Thomas had 2 interceptions last week against Dallas, which I know isn't a great passing offense, but they still got the turnovers, so that creates points for defense. But yeah, really the Steelers are the only one I'm looking at. To move on to kickers, unless you want to talk about another defense.
No, there's no other defense I was really looking at.
Okay, all right, so let's go to kickers. There's not too much, again, really. There's right now there's 3 kickers for free agents. They're actually tied for number 4 with 27 points, but if you go down to rank 9, it's 26 points. So there's not really a big spread as far as on the free agents for points out there for kickers. You got Ryan Suckup for Tennessee, Cody Parker for Chicago, and Aldrick Rosas for the Giants. But I'm sorry if you need a kicker this week. There's not really anyone I see unless you do.
Yeah, if you're going to be starting a kicker, just target a team that you think is going to make it to the red zone but maybe not score a lot of touchdowns. That's why Ryan Suckup is doing so well. The Vikings are pretty decent at moving the ball down the field. They're just really not good at getting the ball in the end zone, so Suckup's had a pretty good year. Cody Parkey, I think, is a solid pickup just because he could get you a couple points here and there off extra points, and he's going to kick some field goals. But yeah, I mean, if you're streaming kickers, just pick somebody, really, and hope for the best.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this a little bit, but Harrison Butker, they're playing Denver. It's in Denver, too, so that should help the kicker. They're on a great offense, so at least he'll get extra points. So he got 8 points last week, so he could make a difference in your lineup, but there's really no winners on this free agency roster right now for kickers.
Yeah, and so moving on to our recap of what happened last week. So, our picks for last week. So in our picks last week, I went 5-1, and you went 3-3.
Yeah.
So in our first matchup, it was myself against you. I obviously picked that one correct. How do you want to do this? Do you want to talk about our picks as we go game to game, or do you want to talk about all the picks right now?
We'll talk about game to game. So we'll start off with the best game of the week, our matchup. So you won, so I'll let you go first because you really stomped me.
Yeah, and you shouldn't feel too bad about this one because it's not like there's a bunch of people on your bench that blew up and you just started the wrong guys. It's just that no one on your team really showed up this week, and most of the people on my team did.
Yeah.
Trading for Christian McCaffrey turned out to be great. I figured it was going to be a really good trade because he has been such an explosive part of that offense and really what keeps that offense moving outside of Cam Newton. He put up 20 points this week. I got 22 from Mike Evans, my free agent pickup of Ryan Fitzpatrick, which honestly I thought was kind of a gamble. I was a little worried about it because he is Ryan Fitzpatrick and I thought he had to fall back to earth at some point, but he put up 29 fantasy points this week. So that was really great for me. My kicker got me 14 points. So all around, my team, even with Carlos Hyde on the bench, my starters all showed up.
Yeah, I mean, Fitzpatrick, man, he threw for 411 yards, 3 touchdowns, and he had 3 picks. So even with throwing 3 interceptions, he still got you 29 points. That's pretty decent. That is really solid for your team. Yeah, I mean, your lowest person on your team was 7 points with Quincy Enunwa, the Jets, with 7 points for a wide receiver. It's not great, but that's pretty solid. I really shot myself in the foot, really, though. I started Jay Ajayi. It just, I don't know what happened. I just lost track of time. We were watching the games together, and the morning game's already started. You look over to me and say, "Hey, you still got Jay Ajayi." So, I mean, I guess I'm in the same boat as Witch Hunt No Collusion because he did the same thing week 1. And then Dan Bailey got me 0 points for Minnesota. Minnesota in a whole just had a horrible game. And then same thing with Stephon Diggs. He only had 3 points. So for 3 players, I got 3 points. You're not going to win doing that. So, hey, I took the loss. Yep, you had a great game. And like you said, I had no one really on the bench. I wanted to start Cooper Kupp instead of Ajayi, which would have been 15 extra points, but I still wouldn't have won. At that point, it would have been 94-134. You just had an amazing week and good win on your part.
Yeah, top points this week. I will take that every single week. And hey, just tell your roster to run a couple extra laps and get it back next week. Moving on from our matchup to Team Cortez versus Sack Lives Matter. Let's see. In this one, I had Team Cortez winning, and they did, and you had Sack Lives Matter. This one was the closest game of the week. Using him, got 14 fantasy points without a touchdown, so that's pretty good. That's something to look forward to with David Johnson. Maybe they're going to start using him more correctly in the future. Marshawn Lynch with 15.5. The man just doesn't age. Larry Fitzgerald, who in the draft, I remember telling Team Cortez that Larry Fitzgerald was not a good pick, and he got him 1 fantasy point this week. 10.5 in week 1, 3.5 in week 2, and then 1 this week. Larry Fitzgerald, just in that offense, is not the player that he used to be, and I think he was drafted way too high in most leagues. Brandon Cooks, 12.5. Really solid game from him. All 3 of those Rams receivers are putting up great weeks every single week. You can start any of them any week and be pretty happy with it. Rob Gronkowski was 7, is a little bit of a down week for him. Deshaun Jackson, 4.5, not great. The Rams defense was 16.5 points, so the Rams defense might be the MVP of this fantasy team and might be one of the highest scoring players that they have all year.
Yeah, and I mean, that brings back to what I've been preaching this whole season. Defense wins you games. Yeah, they scored 16.5 where the Titans had 12.5, but still, I mean, you won by 5 points. So that was pretty close. Yeah, Deshaun Watson really took off. So something to note, Sack Lives Matter. With Nelson Aguilar, he only had 4 points, which that is low on the season for him. But you had Robert Woods on your bench. The only real reason they had so many points, he had 28 points on the bench, is his 2 touchdowns. So Brandon Cooks didn't have any touchdowns, and Robert Woods actually led the team. Let's see, he had 10 receptions, which is 5 points, 100 yards, which is an extra 10, so that's 15, and then 2 touchdowns. So even without those touchdowns, he would have got you 15 points. So that might be something to look at for next week to switching him in. Especially, I mean, they're playing Minnesota, so it might be a little tougher matchup for them. But let's see who's Nelson's playing next week. I mean, they played Indy, and Indy doesn't really have a great defense, and he only scored 4 points. So yeah, I kind of got called out by Cornell this week. He just said I was a hater, still bitter that I lost to him in week 1. I agree with him. I guess I was kind of biased on this one. I'll really have to look at giving him a pick this next week. But yeah, this was a close game, and good job, Team Cortez. You pulled it out.
One thing we do have to mention is Team Cortez still has the fewest points scored against him in the league, and he's 3-0. So he could be running off pure luck still, and his team could start losing. We'll look at that in the next podcast when we pick our wins for next week. Moving on to the Lucky Neckbeards versus Dick Dangla. Let's see. We both picked Neckbeards in this one because his team has looked so strong all year. And then his team shows up this week and puts up 75.5 fantasy points and just a complete dud. Kirk Cousins had that horrible game the entire Vikings offense did. He started Leonard Fournette at running back, who they said was going to be a game-time decision and then didn't play. So that really, really hurts. Melvin Gordon and Adam Thielen both had really good games because Thielen had something like 20 targets and 16 receptions. Just Kirk Cousins loves throwing him the ball. Amari Cooper probably shouldn't be on a roster anymore. It seems like he's given up on football at this point. He only had 2 fantasy points. Eric Ebron at 5.5. He's going to be a fairly solid tight end every single week, especially as long as Jack Doyle is hurt. James Conner with 11.5, who was having a much worse game until that final drive when he put together, I think it was like 50 rushing yards on that final drive and 2 receptions or something like that. He was basically that entire ceiling drive for the Packers. The Ravens defense, 12.5 points and 3 points from his kicker, Matt Bryant. Really just not a good week all around. Even on his bench, he didn't have a lot of points sitting there. There's no one that he could have plug and played instead and won this matchup. Just like your team, just a bad week.
Yeah, I mean, when Minnesota's offense doesn't do anything, you only get 9 points. And then, yeah, Amari Cooper, watching that game since I'm a Dolphins fan, he stopped on at least 2 or 3 routes. There's something wrong with him. There's something up. Either he's unhappy there, he doesn't like the way Derek Carr is throwing the ball. I don't know. Maybe he doesn't like the offense. But this is how he was looking last year, too. There's just something where he just, for some reason, he takes maybe 2 or 3 plays off a game. And you can't have that with who's supposed to be your number 1 wide receiver on your team. To go with Dick Dangler, which good win this week. Tom Brady only had 7 points, but Alvin Kamara, let's talk about him a little bit. He set the franchise record for catches in this game. He had 13 catches, which is insane for a running back, and 16 rushing attempts. So that's 29.
29 touches.
29 touches in a game. Yeah, his rushing wasn't amazing. He has 16 for 66. But let's see. Okay, so he caught 15 balls out of 20 targets for 124 yards. That has been the trend for him. They really haven't been rushing the ball great, but they haven't had to. I mean, Alvin Kamara, with his receiving out of the backfield, I think Mark Ingram really should help that 1-2 punch. He might get some more rushing yards, but, I mean, that can only help his passing game.
Yeah, and so Kamara's kind of looking like the best pick from the first round so far. Todd Gurley, obviously, at first overall, is having a really good year, but Alvin Kamara is pacing the running back position in fantasy right now. He's the number 1 ranked running back, and he's averaging 25.7 points per game. That is absurd, and it doesn't look like it's going to change anytime soon. The Giants, who they play next week, are not all that great on defense. Washington is okay, and then they have a bye week, and then their 2 tough tests after that are Baltimore and Minnesota. So we'll see if the trend continues with him getting all those touches once Ingram is back, and they play Baltimore and Minnesota. But I honestly think they're going to keep force-feeding him that ball, especially in the passing game.
Yeah, I mean, Dick Dangler, to go back to finish off his team, Alfred Morris had 12 points. That's pretty solid. It helped that Matt Burrito did get injured, so he got a couple more carries, got some more yards. Devontae Adams, Emmanuel Sanders, both solid with 14.5 points. Jared Cook had a little bit of a down week, still got 5.5 against Miami's defense, which has actually stepped up this year. TJ Yeldon, with Fournette being out, that helped him a lot. He got 11 points, and then the Jaguars defense 9.5, and Janikowski, the kicker for Seattle, actually got 7 points. So it's crazy when Tom Brady is tied for the lowest scoring player on your team, and you still win by 30 points. So great week for you, Dick Dangla. There's no way you could have called that Jordy Nelson would have had his game of his life. Well, maybe not his life, but it was pretty insane. He had 135 yards in the first quarter, which is insane. Miami, I guess, just forgot that he was even on the field for the first quarter. But he got 26 points on your bench. Like I said, there's no way you could have called that. So I wouldn't have subbed him in for anyone on your team. So good game this week.
Yeah, Jordy Nelson might be the second most surprising thing about the NFL last week, other than what the Bills did to Minnesota. But I remember watching Red Zone, and we were talking about it, and we just kept saying, wait, Jordy Nelson just had a huge catch. Wait, Jordy Nelson just had another huge catch, and that one was for a touchdown. 6 receptions for 173 yards. That's obviously not going to happen every single week.
Nope.
But if they're going to throw the ball to him that much in the future, he's definitely someone you look at putting in that flex spot.
Yeah, and I mean, with Amari Cooper doing nothing, they got to throw it to someone.
Yeah.
So they brought him in Oakland because they knew he was a reliable veteran. So they're trending to use him more and more. So the next game we're going to look at is No Collusion versus the Anal Rapist. So we both were right. We both picked Witch Hunt No Collusion to win. So good job on us. He won 97.5 to 87.5. So I'll talk about Witch Hunt first. So Aaron Rodgers, a solid game versus Washington. They actually lost 17 to 31, but still got 19 points. That is top 10 in the league on weekly averages. Kareem Hunt got the ball, which is surprising. He got two rushing touchdowns. They actually went to him. Let's see. So 18 for 44 yards and 2 touchdowns. Hey, you get those touchdowns, you get those points. Austin Eckler, we talked about picking him up last week on free agency. It seems like you listened to the podcast and listened to us, so good job on you. He only got 5.5 points, but they played the Rams. That's a really hard defense, so he should be getting a lot more points this next week. Marquise Goodwin, 10.5 points. This might be the top of where he's at with Garoppolo going down. We've already talked about his stock probably going down some. Devin Funchess, for some reason, they don't want to throw the ball to Moore in Carolina. They like Funchess. They like him in the end zone. He got you 14 points. So good job with that. For tight end, you might want to look at getting someone else. I know we said there's not too much out there, so maybe you want to trade for a tight end. But Austin Stefari and Jenkins with Jacksonville only got you 2.5. But, I mean, the score of that game was 6-9. So there was no offense in that game entirely. So he could bounce back this next week. Kenny DeGalladay got 14 points. He's really starting to trend upward in Detroit and get some good chemistry with Matt Stafford. The Dolphins defense got you 9 points against Oakland, so they got some turnovers. And Robbie Gould for San Francisco got 7 points. And with Garoppolo being out, they could have more trouble getting into the red zone or to the end zone. So Robbie Gould could be a really good kicker going down the season.
Yeah, Gould was a top 5 kicker last year, and I kind of expect him to be this year as well as far as fantasy goes. Could you imagine if Witch Hunt No Collusion still had Christian McCaffrey on their team? So I'm going to try and throw that out there as many weeks as I can after that trade. Moving on to the Tobias Anal Rapist. He started Tyrod Taylor at quarterback, which I believe on the podcast we told him not to. We told him to move on from Tyrod Taylor. He had that decent week 1 fantasy-wise because he had something like 70 rushing yards for a touchdown or 2. But other than that, he's been horrible this year, and he's just not a good quarterback. Get him off your team. Start anybody else. You have Carson Wentz on your team now, who, if you would have started Carson Wentz, you would have been 1 point away from winning. It would have been a much, much closer game. Ezekiel Elliott got you 12.5 points. That's a low end for him. I think he's going to be at least 12 to 20 points every single week. Chris Thompson, surprisingly, they just didn't throw him the ball. After doing nothing but throw Chris Thompson the ball the first 2 weeks, they just didn't throw it to him. And I believe on the podcast last week, we told you to start Chris Thompson. So, our bad, but no one could have predicted that they just wouldn't throw him the ball anymore. He's maybe the best pass catcher on that team. Golden Tate with 9, decent game. Jarvis Landry with 16. We talked about his stock going up with Baker Mayfield coming back, so he's looking good for the future. Travis Kelce with another 15-point game. Travis Kelce's going to be one of the top tight ends this year. I think that's a no-brainer start every single week. Will Fuller, I've called him a boomer bust option for the past season, but with Deshaun Watson at quarterback, Will Fuller has been one of the best wide receivers in the league fantasy-wise over the past 2 years now, and it looks like that could probably continue. Deshaun Watson just loves throwing the ball deep, especially to the corner of the end zone for Will Fuller. So continue starting him. I think you're looking solid there. The Panthers defense got you 9, and then Gostkowski with 4.
Yeah, to go back to Chris Thompson just real quick, we were watching the games together, and it was the same. He got targeted twice with 1 catch. And I said to you, I was like, it's insane that Chris Thompson and Christian McCaffrey, they weren't throwing the ball to either of them, which that's been most of their offense, really, for the Panthers and Washington the first 2 weeks. So I would look for them to throw the ball to him again, but who knows? I mean, they won the game 31-17, so maybe Alex Smith has turned his tide this season and going back to what he did last year at the beginning of the season and actually throwing the deep ball. So it could be interesting going down the line for Chris Thompson. But to look at your bench, you really didn't have anyone better on your bench. I mean, Danny Amendola had 5.5 points, but you already started Will Fuller in your flex, so you didn't have another running back that actually played on your bench. So you couldn't have done any better. But it was a good win by Witch Hunt No Collusion, which we both chose.
Yeah, and his first win of the season after putting up 2 duds the first 2 weeks. Up next, we got Stairway to Evans, who is currently 3-0, and I think the overall best team in the league right now as far as points go. Actually, I think my team might be a little bit ahead of him, but he's 3-0 and I'm 1-2, so I'm going to call him the best team right now. Against Wide Right, this was a pretty good matchup, 121-113 with the win going to Stairway to Evans. Wide Right, it hurts, man. When you score 113 points in fantasy, you're like, man, this is a game that I should probably win, and then you get beat by over 8 points. That's a rough one. We both picked Stairway to Evans to win this one, so we both get a W for that one. Talking about Stairway to Evans, Ben Roethlisberger, 24 points, really solid game there. That offense is just insane, and this was Road Ben. Road Ben actually put up a good fantasy game. You started him knowing that he sucks on the road, and he pulled through for you, so good job there. Peyton Barber with only 3 points. I know in a lot of leagues, I was really counting on Peyton Barber to have a pretty solid year, and talking to Stairway to Evans, he said the same thing, and it just hasn't happened yet. That run game for Tampa Bay is horrible, and it's why Fitzpatrick is having such a good year. That's why if Le'Veon Bell went there, that would just be absolutely insane. But Peyton Barber probably is stash on your bench worthy, but not start worthy for the foreseeable future. Adrian Peterson hasn't fallen off a cliff yet. He got 24 points this week. Had a great game against the Packers. Went over 100 rushing yards, I think. Got a touchdown. Really good game there. Julio Jones got you 11.5 points. He's going to be a solid play every single week. Michael Thomas was 17, like we've said over and over. Michael Thomas is the best fantasy wide receiver in the game right now, I think. He has 40 targets on the year from Drew Brees. He's caught 38 of them. That is absolutely freaking absurd. And it looks like it's sustainable. That's the craziest thing. O.J. Howard with 10 O.J. Howard looks like he's finally taken over that spot from Cameron Brate. Last year, they drafted O.J. Howard. Everyone was really hyped up about it. And then Winston threw the ball to Cameron Brate all year, and everyone was really let down. This year, the opposite's happening. The high draft pick, O.J. Howard, is finally getting the targets and the catches. Juju Smith-Schuster has looked like he might be the best fantasy option in that offense. That's saying a lot because they have Antonio Brown, and James Conner has had a huge year. But Juju is getting a lot of looks, especially deep, and he's looked like he's really, really worked on his route running, and his hands look really, really good too. The Vikings defense got you 8.5 points in that brutal loss. I don't know how the Vikings get beat 27-6, but their defense still gets 8.5 fantasy points. It just goes to show you how good that defense is. And then Graham Gano got him 8 points.
Yeah, this was a really tough loss for Wide Right. Just to look at from the scores from last week, if he played any other player or any other team besides Stairway to Evans and your team, Josh Gordon, he would have won. So it was just a tough matchup, and sorry, guy. But yeah, like Daniel already said, your team had a pretty good week. Cam Newton, 29 points. That's great for him. Royce Freeman actually had a touchdown, and it seems like he's actually putting up a battle between Philip Lindsay and himself on who's actually going to get that running back slot. And he got 11.5 points, so that's pretty decent for him. And with Joe Mixon being out, Giovanni Bernard got 16.5 points. If Mixon is out longer, that is actually a pretty good trend. It's a great pickup for you, and he should get you around 15 points a game for him because he does catch the ball a little bit out of the backfield as well. Antonio Brown, 14 points. You know he's going to have great weeks. This is kind of a down week for him, But they played Tampa Bay. That was an exciting game, and Tampa Bay put their best corner on Antonio Brown, which usually doesn't do any damage. But hey, Ben Roethlisberger just went to juju the whole game, really. T.Y. Hilton, 7.5 points. Okay, that's pretty solid, or it's more decent. It's not great, but hey, it's 7.5 points, which helped you almost win. Kyle Rudolph was really the only good thing on Minnesota's offense with 12.5 points. He's really solid. I mean, he could be top 5 if they keep going to him throughout the year for fantasy points, 12.5 points. Chris Hogan only got you 4.5. We've already talked about how New England does not look like themselves. There's just something wrong going up in New England, and it's not going to get better for him when Edelman comes back. So 4.5 points, you might need to look for something better. I mean, you got James White on your bench. You could have put him in the flex. He's going to be more consistent, especially when Edelman comes back. He's not going to get replaced by Edelman like Chris Hogan is. And then the Eagles defense, 6.5 points. That's a good showing for them versus Indianapolis. And then Justin Tucker, you know he's always going to be solid. He got you 11 points. And I mean, Matt Ryan was on your bench with 39 points. There's no way that you could have known that he would have went off like that. Cam Newton still got you 29, so that's really solid. So let's see who they play next week.
Here's something to note, though. If you listen to the podcast, I believe we said to start Matt Ryan over Cam Newton last week, and it's because the Falcons were playing the Saints, and both of those teams have very, very electric offenses, and we figured it was going to be a huge shootout, and that's exactly what it was. It went to overtime. Matt Ryan, 5 touchdowns and 374 yards. What a game.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have to start him this week because I believe Carolina's on a bye.
They are on a bye.
Listen to us. Start Matt Ryan. And I mean, it was a home game too. So, I mean, yeah, just listen to the podcast, bud. But yeah, it was a tough loss for you. You lost by 8.5 points. I mean, better luck next week. You had a solid week, so hopefully that continues throughout the rest of the season for you.
And then moving on to our final game, Dalvin and the Chipmunks versus the Jimmy G Spot Rockers. Dalvin and the Chipmunks won this game 101 to 90.5, and we both had Dalvin winning this matchup. So that's another W for both of us there. Patrick Mahomes put up 24 points and just continued his quarterback dominance. I think he's the 3rd overall quarterback right now. Yeah, so it's Matt Ryan might be catching up to him as far as points go after that 39-point game, but he's a top 3 quarterback right now, and you have to start him every single week, and you did, so good job there. You did recently say that Patrick Mahomes is on the trade block. I'm not sure why you would trade Patrick Mahomes right now. You don't have another quarterback on your roster, and so unless you're going to stream quarterbacks every single week, don't trade Patrick Mahomes. He's a solid option every single week, and he's going to put up at least 20 fantasy points, I'd say 90% of the weeks this season.
And they have a great matchup this week too. Like you already talked about, they're playing San Francisco, so he's going to put at least 20 points up this week. Sorry to cut you off. You can keep going, though.
Yeah, they just played San Francisco. That's where he put his 24 fantasy points.
My bad.
Who do they play next week? Let's check. They play Denver. So Denver's got a better defense, and it's in Denver. So that could be a little bit of a scary situation, but you can't bench this guy right now. I don't care what defense he's going up against. With all the weapons that he has in Kansas City and just the arm that he has, he's an electric thrower. Watching him reminds me so much of growing up watching Brett Favre throw the football. And Brett Favre was one of the best fantasy quarterbacks ever. Stick with Mahomes. I wouldn't trade him, but if you really want to, go for it, man.
Yeah, I mean, it's your call.
Yeah, Tevin Coleman got you 11 points. It looks like Devonta Freeman might be back this week, but I still think Tevin Coleman is very startable. Devonta Freeman was there in week 1, and Tevin Coleman put up 9.5 points. He's just a really, really good running back. They really like using him in that offense, and they like doing the 1-2 running back punch. What really helps is Tevin Coleman is a great pass catcher. Moving on from there, Latavius Murray, 5.5 points. Did not have the game that most people thought he was going to because none of the Vikings did. Just a weird game. DeAndre Hopkins with 11, solid week there. Allen Robinson, 6.5. Allen Robinson is really being held back by Mitchell Trubisky. So if Trubisky starts to put it together in that Matt Nagy offense, Robinson's stock is going to go up quite a bit. But until that happens, it's looking kind of sketchy. And it's looking like you might want to start Demaryius Thomas over Allen Robinson. George Kittle, we talked about his stock going up, had 11.5 points this week. I think he's a top 5 tight end this year. Solid option every single week. Keelan Cole had 6.5. He was one of our free agent targets 2 weeks ago or last week. I can't remember exactly which. 6.5 points in your flex. It's not something you're crazy excited about, but 6.5 points is solid. The Bears defense with 17 points.
Jesus.
The Bears defense with Khalil Mack is just absolutely insane. And once again, like, your defense absolutely helped you win this week, something you've been preaching this whole time. If you have a good defense and a good matchup, you have a good chance at winning your fantasy game. Greg Joseph, the kicker, you added him. Shockingly, no one really knew who he was. He got you 8 fantasy points. Hey, good job.
Yeah, I mean, so to go back on the defense, so your Bears scored 17 points against Jimmy G Spot Rockers Texans at 6.5. That's a 10.5 point difference. You won by 10.5 points. So great job with that Bears defense. To go back with a little bit with Latavius Murray, like you said, no one on Minnesota had a good week, but Dalvin Cook didn't play. We expected a lot more out of Latavius Murray. And I mean, it doesn't help with your quarterback has 3 fumbles and 2 picks. That offense really can't get started going. But yeah, a tough week with him. And yeah, I agree with Allen Robertson until there's subbing him out for Demaryius Thomas. Because I mean, until Trubisky gets back, I mean, something's going on in Chicago. There's rumors out there that Matt Nagy has came out and said that he has to kind of tone down his playbook because something's up with Trubisky. He might not be learning the playbook as quick as, and it's kind of hard for Matt Nagy. I could see where he's a little bitter because he was around Mahomes last year with the Chiefs, and to him, from Mahomes to Trubisky, that might be a little bit of downgrade. So he's got to adjust to accept the fact he's got Trubisky. He's got to work with him. He's got to make it work in Chicago because they just spent a big an early first round pick on him last year. So Trubisky's going to be there for a while. To go back to Jimmy G Spot Rockers, tough loss. Drew Brees had 39 points. Where you lost this game, Rashad Penny, 0 points. Randy Bullock, we talked about how we just didn't like his face, so we didn't like him. He only got you 3 points, and then Kenyon Drake had a down week, only 1 point. It was weird. Oakland really stopped the rush versus Miami. Frank Gore didn't do too much. Kenyon Drake didn't too much. It was all about the wide receivers and the outside and across the middle for Miami. So Kenyon Drake did have a down week. But Rashad Penny, it looks like Chris Carson, I know he's coming back from an injury, but Chris Carson's really taken off in that backfield. Rashad Penny only had 3 rushing attempts for 5 yards. I can't see, until he proves it, you can't rely on him. You do have Sony Michel, which he's also coming back from an injury, but he could be in a better offense with 5.5 points compared to Rashad Penny, 0 points. So you might want to switch him in there. On your bench, you have 10.5 from Ted Ginn. And Kerryon Johnson, which had the 100-yard game, he had 11 points on your bench. So I would look at one of those 3 players, either Sony Michel, Ted Ginn, or Kerryon Johnson to fill in for Rashad Penny. But to finish out your team, Texas defense 6.5. Odell Beckham, I don't think he got in the end zone, did he? Let's look. No, but he still had 9 catches for 100 yards. So that got you a solid 14.5 points. Keenan Allen had a down week. We've already talked how the Chargers offense might be trending more to Mike Williams. Keenan Allen got you 3.5 points. And then Zach Ertz, 9.5. He is, at least last year with Wentz, he was his red zone go-to target. But Wentz, for some reason, like Goddard better. Maybe it was because Indianapolis' defense really focused on Zach Ertz because he is the best patch catcher on that team, where it opened up for Dallas Goedert. But when Wentz gets more comfortable, they get not Nelson Aguilar, who's the other wide receiver that's out for them?
Alshon Jeffrey.
When they get Alshon Jeffrey back, that's going to help him spread the defense out. It's going to get Zach Ertz more yards, more targets. So I could see him definitely improving next week.
Yeah, and the craziest thing about this matchup, so Rashad Penny in your flex was 0 points. You lost by 10.5 points. If you started Ted Ginn there, who was in the blowout matchup that we talked about with the offenses going crazy, we called that 10.5 points. You would have tied. Kerryon Johnson, 11 points, who maybe wasn't the most obvious choice there, but the Lions have started to move towards Kerryon Johnson being their number one running back, and he's obviously the most talented one there. And he, in my opinion, was obviously a better start than Rashad Penny was. Rashad Penny, so far this year, in week 1, 7 carries for 8 yards. Week 2, 10 carries for 30 yards. And then, week 3, 3 carries for 5 yards. He was picked in the first round, but he's not the starting running back there, and they do not like doing a two-headed monster at running back. They like having their main guy. They always have, and I assume they always will. So until Rashad Penny is clearly the starter there, either drop him or stash him on your bench.
Yeah. I think if you drop him and if he picks it up later down the year, you could pick him up. He's definitely not worth a roster spot this week or the foreseeable future. So you could pick up some of those free agents that we talked about earlier in the podcast because, he's not worth taking up a spot on your team. I think to finish up this week, we'll just go over the standings because we didn't mention that this week. So the best player, the best division, it sucks. I'm in it. So Stairway to Evans and Team Cortez are both 3-0. We did talk about how Team Cortez does have one of the lowest scoring teams against him. So he hasn't played... The teams that he's played haven't had the best weeks for them this season. But hey, he's still 3-0. He's doing something right. Next, you got Dick Danglo at 2-1 and Lucky Neckbeard's 2-1. And then myself, 1-2, one Tyreek Hill. And then at the bottom of the league, Sack Like Matters, 0-3. Hopefully, myself and Sack Like Matters turns it up this week because we definitely need some wins.
Yeah, and then in the Holes division, we got Dowd and the Chipmunks on top at 2-1. And then a slew of teams at 1-2. Everyone else in that division is 1-2. Myself, Wide Right, the Anal Rapist, the Jimmy G Spot Rockers, and Witch Hunt No Collusion. This division is wide open, and I'm looking to grab the bull by the horns and win this division and win another championship.
So I think that's all we got this week. So thanks for joining us again. We will be posting this podcast. That way you can listen to it tonight.
Yeah, should be tonight after a little bit of editing. And thank you, assholes, for listening, and we'll talk to you on Saturday.
All right, I'm Matt Bowen.
And I'm Daniel Powell.
See you later, fuckers.